the floor, and you know what I'm talking about here on my channel right now. It's
Blake Lively always knew that her carefully polished Hollywood image was built on fragile glass, a facade of perfect smiles, red carpet gowns, and picture-perfect family portraits with Ryan Reynolds. But when she walked into that dimly lit courtroom with the press waiting outside like a pack of wolves and Bryan Freedman standing firm with a stack of damning papers in his hand, the illusion shattered into sharp fragments, and the sound of it was loud enough to echo across tabloids, social media feeds, and hushed conversations in Beverly Hills mansions, because this wasn't just a lawsuit anymore. This was war. A trial by fire where reputations would be stripped bare, secrets spilled, and the possibility of jail time hovered like a vulture above her golden head. And the tension in that courtroom was thick enough to choke as Freedman, a lawyer infamous for turning scandals into graveyards for careers, launched into a brutal opening that painted Blake not as the America's sweetheart actress but as a manipulative, calculating player who thought she could twist narratives, intimidate witnesses and silence whistleblowers, yet underestimated the iron grip of the law. And as he spoke, his words carved deeper than knives, pointing to hidden documents, leaked texts and audio recordings that journalists had been whispering about for months, but no one had dared to air. And suddenly the gallery erupted with gasps, flashes from sketch artists, and frantic typing from reporters who sensed that this was bigger than a celebrity scandal. This was the possible collapse of a Hollywood empire built on charm and PR illusion. While outside, the streets were flooded with fans torn between disbelief and rage, signs reading "Justice for the Truth" and "Free Serena" waved in chaos. Cameras zoomed in on every flicker of Blake's expression, and Ryan Reynolds, once her unshakable support, sat stiffly behind her, his jaw clenched, refusing to make eye contact, the air between them colder than, because rumors had already spread that even he had been subpoenaed to testify against her. A betrayal so sharp that it cut through the glossy magazine spreads of their love story like a blade. And as Bryan Freedman thundered about accountability, about how Blake's influence was used not only to shield herself but to endanger others, including those who once considered her a friend, whispers started rising that even Taylor Swift, her longtime ally turned silent critic, might be forced into the legal spotlight, dragged in by leaked group chats and financial trails that hinted at manipulation far beyond the Gossip Girl fantasy. And as the judge leaned forward, tapping a gavel for silence, the weight of what was unfolding pressed down on everyone present, because this wasn't just about Blake Lively anymore. This was about the machinery of fame, the lies Hollywood buries under glitz, the people destroyed in the shadows of red carpets, and the price of thinking you're untouchable. And in that moment, with the cameras rolling and the world's eyes locked on her, Blake felt the walls closing in, Bryan Freedman's voice ringing like a death knell as he ended his statement with the chilling words, "No one, not even Hollywood royalty, stands above the truth." And the silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Blake's own heartbeat thundering in her ears as she realized the nightmare had only just begun. Bryan Freedman's devastating opening statement in Part 1 did not end when the gavel struck. In fact, it became a living thing, expanding beyond the courtroom walls and spilling into the veins of Hollywood itself, pumping dread, curiosity, and speculation into every corner of the entertainment world. And as the reporters dashed to their laptops, dictating furious notes into phones, hashtags began trending globally. Hashtag Blake on trial. Hashtag Freedman versus Lively. Hashtag could jail be next, and even hashtag justice for Hollywood. Each feeding into the frenzy that would define this battle not as a simple lawsuit, but as the trial of an era. And yet as cameras zoomed in on Blake's face, her controlled poise faltered, revealing something raw, terrified, something that betrayed the very persona she had crafted for over a decade, because for the first time she wasn't playing Serena van der Woodsen on a soundstage where directors could yell cut. This was reality, and there was no script to save her, no lighting to hide the cracks, and certainly no Ryan Reynolds standing as her charming shield anymore. Because Ryan's posture in the back of the room screamed detachment, his arms crossed tightly across his chest, his eyes deliberately avoiding hers, and Hollywood insiders who read body language better than film scripts whispered to each other that his silence was the loudest betrayal of all. And that was only the beginning, because Freedman, a lawyer whose reputation as both a savior and executioner had earned him a place as one of the most feared men in Los Angeles, leaned into his strategy like a conductor orchestrating chaos, filing rapid-fire motions designed not just to corner Blake legally, but to expose her every weakness to the public, knowing full well that in today's world, the court of public opinion often delivered harsher sentences than any judge could, and as he walked out of the courthouse surrounded by flashing bulbs and microphones shoved in his face, he didn't say much. Only 5 chilling words. The truth will come out. And those words reverberated like an earthquake, sending tremors into Blake's carefully built empire, rattling the PR strategists she had paid millions to, the assistants tasked with silencing rumors, the allies who once stood beside her, but were now quietly packing their distance into neat little statements about support from afar. Because no one wanted to go down with a sinking ship. And in Hollywood, loyalty was a luxury few could afford. Especially when whispers began surfacing of sealed evidence that could transform this civil battle into a criminal storm. Evidence that hinted at threats sent to silence former employees, at hush money wired through offshore accounts, at patterns of coercion that lawyers were already using the word fraud to describe. And as tabloids dug deeper, they uncovered old blind items that suddenly seemed prophetic, stories about an A-list actress who manipulated friendships and sabotaged careers. Behind closed doors, stories long dismissed as gossip now resurfacing as chilling backstory. And with each leak, each whisper, Blake's face morphed from that of a beloved star into that of a potential villain. A manipulator who had confused her ability to play Serena on screen with her ability to script reality. And while Ryan wrestled silently with his own demons, rumors swirling that he had already spoken to investigators off the record to shield himself from fallout, the media delighted in dragging Taylor Swift into the narrative, dissecting every lyric she had ever written about betrayal and silence, turning her friendship with Blake into a subplot for public consumption. And when Selena Gomez's name appeared in connection with alleged text messages, the internet practically combusted, fans demanding screenshots, analysts debating whether these stars had unknowingly become pawns in a scandal much larger than themselves. And through it all, Bryan Freedman thrived, using precision strikes in court to weaken Blake's defense, revealing piece by piece that she had attempted to delay evidence turnover, had possibly tampered with witness availability, and each revelation wasn't just filed quietly. It was leaked strategically to the press, amplifying the sense that Blake's every move was not just being litigated, but broadcast to a world that loved nothing more than the rise and fall of a celebrity icon. And at night, when the cameras switched off and the fans dispersed, Blake sat in her sprawling mansion, lights dimmed, scrolling through feeds that once adored her but now mocked her, seeing memes of her Gossip Girl character superimposed with captions like, "You know you love me, but the jury doesn't," and "Zoxo Serena's downfall." And those memes cut deeper than she would ever admit, because they blurred the line between fiction and reality, and she could feel her legacy slipping through her fingers, every tear hidden behind bathroom doors, every frantic call to her. Lawyers answered with the same exhausted reminder. Bryan Freedman had her cornered, and the judge was losing patience with her delays, which meant the clock was ticking faster than anyone had expected. And so part 2 becomes not just about the legal war but about the psychological collapse, the unraveling of a woman who once commanded cameras with a smile, now reduced to fighting for survival while every betrayal, every alliance, every whispered rumor becomes evidence, becomes fodder, becomes part of a spectacle too massive to control. And while the world debated whether jail was a real possibility, Blake herself finally began to understand the terrifying truth. It wasn't the gossip that would destroy her. It was the silence of those she had once controlled, now free to speak. And as Bryan Freedman prepared his next devastating move, sharpening the blade of truth he promised to reveal, Blake Lively realized with icy certainty that her story was no longer hers to script, and the world was hungry for her downfall. It belonged to the world. The courthouse in downtown Los Angeles had seen its share of celebrity trials, but as part 3 of this saga unfolded, the building itself seemed to hum with anticipation, the marble floors trembling under the footsteps of reporters, legal analysts, and fans who camped outside with posters that swung wildly between justice for Blake and lock her up, creating a carnival of chaos that blurred the line between trial and spectacle. And inside that courtroom the air was so charged it felt electric, as if the gavel itself carried enough voltage to set the city ablaze. And when Bryan Freedman rose again, papers in hand, his voice cut through the tension with surgical precision, announcing not only new evidence but witnesses whose testimonies, if admitted, could alter the trajectory of the entire case, because while Part 2 had hinted at manipulation and coercion, Part 3 made it clear, this wasn't just a civil dispute over contracts and image, it was the possible unraveling of a criminal conspiracy stretching years, with Blake Lively at its glittering center. And as the gallery leaned forward, Freedman revealed that 3 former employees had come forward, each telling eerily similar stories of intimidation. Late-night phone calls where threats were wrapped in velvet words, promises of promotion turned into ultimatums of silence, and contracts that blurred legality so expertly that even seasoned lawyers marveled at the craft. But the real bombshell was that one of those witnesses, a former PR strategist, had recordings, audio files played softly in the courtroom where a voice unmistakably like Blake's hissed words that sent chills through the crowd. "You'll never work in this town again if you betray me." And though her defense immediately objected, claiming the recordings were doctored, the damage was already done, because every journalist in the room had heard it, every juror's eyes had flickered in recognition. And in that moment, perception became reality. The idea of Blake Lively as America's sweetheart evaporating into smoke, replaced by an image of a woman wielding power like a weapon. And outside, social media erupted. Hashtag Blake the Bulldozer trending alongside hashtag Freedman Files. Fans posting clips of Gossip Girl scenes side by side with courtroom sketches, drawing parallels between Serena van der Woodsen's manipulative arcs and the accusations now leveled at Blake herself. And though her lawyers scrambled to regain control, presenting counterarguments that the recordings lacked chain of custody, the truth was simple. Once the public hears a voice, they believe it, and Bryan Freedman knew that, smirking as he leaned back, letting the court drown in the weight of implication, while Blake sat stiff, her fingers clenching so tightly around a silver pen that it bent under pressure, her face a mask of fury and fear, and Ryan Reynolds, her husband, no longer even pretending to stand beside her, shifting uncomfortably in his seat, his lawyer whispering in his ear, reminding him that his own testimony was looming. Because yes, Part 3 brought Ryan squarely into the spotlight. Subpoenas delivered to his office and his agents. His role as the supportive husband twisted into a narrative of complicity. And while his camp leaked carefully worded statements about trusting the process, insiders whispered that Ryan was prepared to testify truthfully, even if it meant incriminating his wife. And the thought of that betrayal gnawed at Blake, her perfect Hollywood marriage unraveling under the glare of fluorescent lights and sworn oaths. But Bryan Freedman wasn't finished, because he turned his sights on Hollywood's most powerful friendships, dragging Taylor Swift and Selena Gomez into the courtroom drama. Not physically, but through documents and text messages that suggested Blake had leveraged those friendships as currency, trading loyalty for silence, pushing narratives through pop culture's most influential voices. And suddenly the fandoms were at war, Swifties clashing with Blake's defenders, Selena's fans combing through old interviews for hints of tension, and every corner of the internet became a battlefield dissecting whether these friendships were authentic bonds or calculated alliances. And all the while, the judge grew more impatient, warning Blake's lawyers that delaying tactics would no longer be tolerated, that discovery deadlines would be enforced, and whispers grew that a referral to the district attorney's office was possible if tampering or fraud were proven, meaning jail was no longer a speculative headline but a looming shadow. And inside Blake's once unshakable circle, panic spread like wildfire. Assistants deleting old emails, managers lawyering up, even stylists refusing to comment, because no one knew how deep this rabbit hole went. And as Bryan Freedman walked through it all with the calm precision of a surgeon, carving away her defenses piece by piece, the psychological toll on Blake became impossible to hide. Paparazzi catching her stumbling from her SUV, her eyes hollow, makeup smeared, tabloids splashing headlines like "From Red Carpet to Ruin," and "The Star Who Fell Too Far." And though her team begged her to stay quiet, she lashed out on Instagram, posting cryptic captions that only fueled speculation. And when she finally deleted them, screenshots had already gone viral, interpreted as confessions, pleas, or even veiled threats depending on the audience. And that instability only emboldened Freedman, who filed another motion hinting at financial irregularities tied to charities Blake had promoted, suggesting that the glow of philanthropy hid darker truths, and suddenly fans who once adored her began to ask hard questions. Had they been manipulated all along? Had the fashion icon they idolized built her empire not on talent but on fear, intimidation, and deceit? And though Blake tried to counter with staged paparazzi walks holding her children's hands, hoping to remind the world of her motherhood, the strategy backfired, critics accusing her of exploiting her family for sympathy, and the narrative hardened. This wasn't a mother under attack, this was a mogul caught in her own web. And so part 3 swelled into something larger than even Hollywood could contain, the story dominating news cycles, eclipsing wars and elections, because the world has always craved the spectacle of a queen dethroned, and as the judge set dates for the next phase of the trial, warning that criminal referrals were on the table, Bryan Freedman leaned over to his co-counsel and whispered words caught by a hot mic that sent shockwaves through the courtroom. "We're just getting started," and Blake, hearing those words, realized with icy dread that her nightmare had only deepened, and that the bars of a cell might not be a metaphor after all, but a reality waiting just around the corner. The final act of a tragedy she never imagined would bear her name. The courtroom was no longer just a place of justice. It had turned into an inferno of reputations burning and alliances collapsing. And as part 4 of this saga opened, Blake Lively's carefully curated facade stood closer to ruin than ever before. The walls of her empire crumbling as Bryan Freedman pushed forward with the aggression of a man who smelled blood in the water, his voice commanding every corner of the hall as he announced that the latest batch of leaked emails, sealed contracts, and witness statements would shatter any last hope Blake had of controlling the narrative. Because now the judge wasn't just listening. He was dissecting, weighing, and visibly leaning against the actress who once thought her Hollywood glow could outshine the truth. But now under the weight of evidence her charm dimmed like a dying candle, and while paparazzi flashes lit up the courthouse steps outside, inside the silence of fear held everyone hostage, each word Bryan spoke cutting deeper into Blake's crafted image, and Ryan Reynolds, sitting with folded arms at the back, looked torn between loyalty and silent calculation, his once playful smirk now erased, his eyes colder than the marble pillars towering above them, as if he was already envisioning the possibility of detachment, of walking away before her downfall swallowed him too. But Blake, gripping the edge of the defense table, refused to cave, whispering frantically to her lawyers, her voice rising with desperation, yet even Selena Gomez, who had been roped into the scandal through whispered phone logs and late-night confessions, shifted uncomfortably in her seat, unwilling to let Blake drag her name further into the abyss. And it was in this charged atmosphere that Bryan revealed the most damning twist yet. Financial records showing offshore transfers tied directly to Blake's production ventures. Evidence that screamed manipulation, deceit, and potential fraud. The kind of revelation that turns a civil courtroom drama into the shadow of a criminal trial, and gasps spread through the audience as Blake's complexion turned pale. Because this wasn't just about headlines anymore. This was about handcuffs looming in the distance, and while her lawyers scrambled to object, the judge raised a firm hand, silencing the chaos, his glare fixed on Blake like a predator cornering prey, demanding an explanation she couldn't convincingly deliver, her words stumbling, her narrative collapsing, and Bryan seized the opening, weaving a monologue that painted her as not just careless but calculated, a woman who used friends, lovers, and colleagues as pawns in her pursuit of control, and his rhetoric echoed like hammer blows, each line designed to remind the jury that celebrity status could not buy innocence. And the reporters scribbling notes in frenzy knew this was the headline moment. Blake Lively, once America's sweetheart, now staring down accusations that could morph into a criminal indictment, and while Taylor Swift's name was once again dragged into the discussion through veiled references to text exchanges that hinted at manipulation, Taylor herself stayed silent outside, her team refusing to comment, but her absence only fueled speculation that she too was distancing herself, a quiet betrayal in the eyes of a woman who once considered her a sister. Yet betrayal seemed to follow Blake everywhere now, because as Bryan pressed further, even documents with Ryan's partial signatures surfaced implying he may have unknowingly been complicit in her schemes, and Ryan's glare toward her sharpened, his knuckles tightening, because now his reputation too teetered on the edge, forcing him to choose between saving Blake or saving himself. And the air grew heavier, cameras capturing every twitch, every whisper. The final chapter of this scandal unfolded with a tension so thick it seemed to suffocate even the reporters who had grown accustomed to courtroom spectacles. Because by now the Bryan Freedman versus Blake Lively case had transformed from a private legal dispute into a worldwide obsession. The kind of saga that blurred the line between Hollywood gossip and legal precedent. And as the fifth act opened, the courthouse was overflowing with media vans, camera tripods, security barricades and throngs of fans holding signs that either begged for Blake's innocence or demanded her arrest. A carnival of chaos that underscored just how far her image had fallen. Because years ago she was the untouchable star, the radiant face of charm and sophistication. But now she walked through metal detectors with her head low, her designer outfits feeling less like a fashion statement, and more like armor shielding her from the daggers of public judgment. And Bryan Freedman, armed with binders of damning evidence and a courtroom presence honed by decades of high-profile battles, wasted no time reminding everyone that Blake's story was no longer about gossip. It was about survival, her empire dangling by a thread, her freedom itself hanging in the balance, because the leaks of emails and financial transfers in Part 4 had already cracked her credibility wide open. But Part 5 began with a new explosion, the release of private testimony transcripts that suggested Blake had knowingly pressured associates into falsifying contracts, not only implicating herself, but creating the specter of conspiracy. And the room gasped when Bryan read the words aloud, his voice slow and deliberate, making sure every juror felt the weight of each syllable, while Blake's knuckles whitened on the defense table, her lawyers whispering furiously as if trying to stitch a wound that was already bleeding out. More telling than any spoken word. And across the aisle Ryan Reynolds, because he no longer leaned forward in support, no longer offered even the pretense of solidarity. Instead he sat with arms crossed, jaw clenched, eyes forward, a man calculating his own escape. And that shift wasn't lost on the cameras broadcasting this drama to millions, viewers dissecting every micro-expression as if they were jurors themselves. Because in the court of public opinion Blake had already lost, and while Taylor Swift's name floated again through insinuations of leaked messages that hinted at behind-the-scenes manipulations, Taylor herself kept a studied silence, refusing to shield her former best friend. A silence that spoke louder than any defense, because the world interpreted it as abandonment, proof that even Blake's most loyal allies had stepped away. And the judge, weary but resolute, allowed Bryan to proceed with his ruthless presentation, because now the central question wasn't just whether Blake had manipulated contracts or hidden financial transfers. It was whether these actions crossed into the territory of criminal fraud, a pivot that could redefine her fate entirely. And Bryan drove the knife deeper, presenting a timeline that painted Blake as not just reactive but proactive, a mastermind orchestrating layers of deception, using her fame as a shield while she maneuvered behind the scenes. And the jury shifted uncomfortably, because what once sounded like petty celebrity squabbles now resembled corporate-level manipulation, the kind of thing that ruined lives, drained bank accounts and broke laws. And Blake, sensing the ground crumbling beneath her, launched into an emotional outburst, pleading with the judge that she was misunderstood, that the narrative was twisted against her, her voice cracking as tears streaked down her carefully powdered face. But the performance felt rehearsed, hollow, like a script she'd used one too many times. And Bryan pounced, his rebuttal merciless. "This isn't a movie, Ms. Lively, this is real life. And in real life, lies have consequences." A line that instantly went viral on social media, replayed in endless loops with captions mocking her downfall. And as her sobs echoed against the wood-paneled walls, the judge's gavel struck like thunder, restoring order but not sympathy, because even his expression revealed impatience, as though he too had grown weary of her theatrics. And when he allowed a brief recess, the hallways erupted into chaos, journalists running to file stories, bloggers live-streaming updates, Twitter threads dissecting every sentence, and outside, protesters clashed. Fans chanting her name clashed with critics chanting, "Justice for the truth." The courthouse steps resembling less a place of law and more a battlefield of public perception. And as the cameras turned back inside, the reality became undeniable. Part 5 was not just another day in court. It was the breaking point. The cliff edge where Blake either saved herself with impossible evidence or fell into the abyss of disgrace and possible jail time. Thanks for watching. Subscribe my channel Coravanta for more updates. With Sardar Zuriat Abbas Khan Lashari,